heat just turned off. God's timing is always right. Hi guys, and welcome back to my channel. Hello if you're new here, my name is Mo. I do video essays. This is one of them. If you guys don't know, I also make fashion TikToks outside of here, so I will put that on the screen somewhere if you want to see more of me day to day, because my video essays I'm doing better, guys, aren't I? I'm doing better, right? Yeah, if you want to see more of me, those will be linked in the description as always. And let's get into today's video. I upgraded to an iPad. So if you guys watched my 5 TV shows nobody talks about and I don't know why video, then you will know that I love period pieces and I love crime shows. I discovered TNT's The Alienist. I was really intrigued, and to be honest, I wasn't disappointed. The show was actually really good. Writing in the first season is phenomenal, and the second season is a little bit slow, but it picks up towards the end. When I finished The Alienist, I knew I wanted to talk about it on the channel. I don't know if it's popular. I don't even know if you guys want to see this video, but I definitely wanted to give you this video. So today I'm going to be kind of ranking and just discussing the historical accuracy of the costuming in The Alienist, as well as the trends and what it was like during that time period. You guys know I'm a history buff. I love to give you guys as much info as I can. Before I get into this though, I want to say, like, I'm not necessarily a stickler when it comes to period piece costuming. Like, I like Pride and Prejudice zombies, but I do think it's important to get the overall aesthetic of the time period that you're going for. So I'm mainly going to be analyzing the costuming and how I thought it aided or wounded the scene and the character themselves. There are so many moving parts and fast cycling trends to Victoria fashion. Like, you think we had micro trends, the Victorians had micro trends, especially in major cities. So we're going to be talking about some of those and digging up some of those old relics, those old forlorn micro trends that have gone to the wayside. What am I talking about? Let's get into TNT's The Alienist. Set in New York City during the Gilded Age, The Alienist is TNT's psychological thriller based on the 1994 book of the same name by Caleb Carr. The show follows 3 main characters: Dr. Laszlo Chrysler, who is an alienist; Sarah Howard, the first woman to be appointed to the NYPD; and illustrator/journalist John Moore of the New York Times. I saw that it was Gilded Era. I was really interested. I feel like there's not a lot of media, and this isn't a time period that I see talked about often, especially when we talk about American history, because it was a really transformative time in the world and therefore by proxy in fashion. Also, in case you're like, what the hell is an alienist? It's basically just a psychologist. That's what they called them in the 19th century, because they thought people who were mentally ill were alienated from their true nature. Okay, let us begin with what we know. Extending roughly from 1870 to 1900, this period received its moniker due to it being a time of extreme social issues masked by a thin gold gilding. The phrase Gilded Age was actually coined by legendary authors Mark Twain and Charles Dudley Warner in their 1873 novel The Gilded Age, A Tale of Today, which is a satirical critique of the time period. It's giving it like Monty Python and the Holy Grail. The Gilded Era was interesting. It was an extremely unstable time for America. April 1865 saw the end of the Civil War, and by December of the same year, the 13th Amendment was added to the Constitution, officially abolishing slavery. Because of the loss of chattel slavery labor, by 1870, just 5 short years after the abolition, there were more than 2,400 woolen mills and hundreds of cotton mills across the country. This ability to quickly produce inexpensive manufactured goods completely changed the landscape of our life. Again, everything in America goes back to race, with an influx of freed Black Americans, as well as Ellis Island becoming a designated federal immigration port. Needless to say, the northern industrials and railway owners were thriving post-war. And there was a ton of wealth accumulated and lost. Honestly, there was a ton of wealth lost during this time, as well as alleged whirlwind corruption from powerhouse families like the Vanderbilts and the Morgans, which we actually will see featured on the show. And because of that, it was fast moving. And the way people complain about fast fashion trends and cycles today, the Gilded Age saw trends come and go at their version of warp speed. Thankfully though, we don't have to try and keep up with every micro trend during this era, because in 1892, Vogue was founded to literally chronicle and critique the ever-evolving aesthetics on what to wear when. The girlies were eating so much, we were like, we gotta make a magazine to document this. The people got to know. Vogue covered everything from how to fit a jacket over your mutton sleeves to what dress would be popular for December debutante season. I really love vintage Vogue covers, not only because they're like a little time capsule, but also because costume balls and fancy dress parties were extremely popular amongst the upper echelon during this time period, and that's not something that we really see nowadays. We don't have these large social gatherings, at least publicly. And again, because of the time period, most of the covers are gorgeous. Gorgeous illustrations. While it's set in the Gilded Era, it is not the only thing that influences the show nor the costuming of the show. It's also influenced by the Gilded Era's overlap with the Progressive Era. Spanning from 1896 to 1916, the Progressive Era was a time of widespread social and political reform across the United States, centered heavily, of course, in major cities like New York. Season 1 actually takes place in 1896, which places our characters at the starting line of what would unfortunately be the relay race to women's rights. Progressive Era's infancy and its impact on women of varying status and ideals shine through in the costuming, and I'm just gonna sum it up nice and simple for you. In the Progressive Era, fashion for men and women looked toward the coming century. Women began to spend more time outside the home, both at work and at play. In turn, fashion responded. Sportswear for women became highly popular. Women now had clothing options more suitable for activities newly socially acceptable to them, like tennis, golf, and cycling. Cycling was huge during this time period and among Victorian women in general, so much so that it actually birthed the cycling costume. Bicycling, or the cycling costume, whatever you want to call it, is basically a cross between a skirt and pants, so that when the wearer is standing and their legs are together, it looks like a skirt, and it's only until they like break into a wide stride or they're riding their bike can you notice that it's actually culottes. Culottes have been around, back again. We wore them in the 2010s, probably wear them again in like 10 years and think they're the cutest thing ever. Even though the cycling costume was created, it took a while to catch on. It was still very controversial, and honestly, most women stuck to a modified skirt that had kind of a deep pleat in the back. And the cycling costume was not only the skirt, it was the top as well, and combined, this look was called the shirtwaist. While it's pretty self-explanatory, a shirtwaist is a long skirt with a shirt that's tailored like a men's dress shirt, but was feminized with things like bright colors, lace, frills, and other trimmings. Shirtwaist ensemble was extremely popular among working women of any career, although housemaids and service people would typically wear aprons over theirs to protect them, you know, from getting gross. Shirtwaist silhouette is very iconic, it's very familiar, especially when you include the leg of mutton sleeve. Yes, this era they did wear mutton sleeves, which I know are very polarizing. However, unlike the mutton sleeves of the 1830s, the 1890s version started at the shoulder seam. Starting at the shoulder gave the dress cut a more sporty look, allowed the wearer to have a greater range of motion. The previous decades mutton sleeves were kind of worn off the shoulder and were more restrictive. Honestly, hot take, controversial take, I like leg of mutton sleeves. They just make me feel nostalgic. I always associate them with royalty. And any period piece you watch, 9 times out of 10, they're gonna slap a leg of mutton sleeve on there, even if it doesn't go. Like I said, this time period was one of many ever-changing micro trends, as well as experimentation to see what could we create? What could this new industrial world that we live in produce for us? We went from garment makers using whale bones to make the sleeve stiff and immovable to things like puffer stuffers, which were pillows or garments shaped like crescents that you would tie to your arm and be worn under the sleeve to keep shape, and you could rewash them. Anyways, don't worry though, because if you don't like leg of mutton sleeves, they really did not last as long, as the 1890s saw variations in sleeve lengths and necklines. Evening wear often featured high collars and long sleeves, while afternoon ensembles were open at the neck and usually featured short sleeves. I think that was like risque or like expose your chest or your shoulders. Was kind of strictly for evening gown dresses, balls, stuff like that. Cloaks and capes were also really popular at this time, especially as sleeves got bigger and your collars got higher. It became increasingly harder to fit a coat over your Disney turkey leg size sleeve. On this model that was seen frequently in the mail order catalogs of the 90s is a jacket based on the traditional seaman's peacoat. cut straight in a double-breasted front and fitted behind. I'm only raising this because you'll see throughout the show most of the characters wear a similar type of coat to this. Oh, fun fact before we get into season 1. Before he went on to be Assistant Secretary of the Navy and then leader of the free world, Teddy Roosevelt was actually the New York Police Commissioner from 1895 to 1897. So we get a season of young Teddy Roosevelt looking fine and solving crime. Also, a little disclaimer before we get into it. This is a crime show and heavily based on reality. Things like Paresis Hall, the Dusters, they're all real things. So just exercise caution when you're Googling. If you want to learn about these topics, just know that history is not always pretty, and this is a pretty ugly time for America. Okay, let's get into season 1.
Dr. Chrysler, I've read your work. I found it fascinating.
When we're introduced to Sarah, we see her in a quintessential look for the time period. She's in a green and brown earth tone walking suit with a corset bodice and huge leg of mutton sleeves. That's how you can tell before her job with the police commissioner, she was a lady of high standing. Walking suits were pretty stock standard in the 1890s, and they typically consisted of 3 parts. A shirt, a waist, and a coat. It allowed for breathability and comfort for the modern woman. She's also wearing a high collar top with a portrait brooch pinned in the middle. And that's something you'll see Sarah wear a lot throughout the show, and it's because brooches were actually huge during this time period, especially because in later Victorian years, people tended to shy away from jewelry in day-to-day wear, and at one point it was even considered tacky to wear diamonds in the daylight. We also notice that Sarah is wearing a long chain, which is basically a chain that's looped and caught through the bodice with a brooch, and on the end is a watch. Sometimes it would be a lorgnette, but we learn as we go throughout the season that that watch that she wears every day is her father's. And it makes sense. The exemption of some necklace brooches, which to her credit were extremely popular at the time. Only day-to-day jewelry we see Sarah wear is her dad's ring, which we learn about again later in the season. She's quite serious and sardonic when you meet her, and she's got this shield up as a way of protection because she is the first woman to work for the NYPD, a job she attained through her own merit and her father's friendship with the current police commissioner, Teddy Roosevelt. Not Sarah being a nepotism cop. Throughout the show, Sarah's fashion is so interesting because you can see that she still embraces trends and femininity early on, and then it starts to swiftly wane throughout the season. And from the beginning, you can always see these masculine touches in her costuming. I mean, for one, she frequently wears boater hats, which were predominantly male hats at the time, although women did start to wear them during sporting activities and travel. You can tell that Sarah has a particular distaste for anything distinctly feminine. This is highlighted early on in a scene where her maid is unlacing her corset. She has this really great line that says, "I don't know if they abhor our shape or crave another." And the camera pans down and you see the grooves and indentations the corset leaves along her body. Tight lacing is sort of a myth, considering corsets were meant to fit the wearer like a bra, like the ones we wear today. I'm sorry, I know corsets were like whatever, but it just sounds painful. Like, who wants to walk around in 2022 wearing Skims shapewear every damn day? Not I. Corset combined with the leg of mutton sleeves with the bell skirt is why we see so many minuscule waists in illustrations from this time period. Obviously, yes, they were like starving post-war as well. The stark contrast did allow their waists to appear slimmer than they actually were. This is most notable in sketches of the Gibson girl, which was a term coined by illustrator Charles Gibson, and she was basically just the socialite of the time, like trendy, the it girl. She knew it, she had it, she slayed. Sarah is not a Gibson girl. Some of my favorite scenes of her throughout the show are little snippets where she's in her chemisette and her hair is loose and she's just smoking a cigarette, which also, side note to her privilege and power, she smokes in public, which at this time was very, very rare. Women who smoke in restaurants, on boats, stuff like that. So that's why she's able to shirk a lot of these societal standards for what women should wear, because who gonna check me, boo? As Sarah starts to work with Laszlo and John, we definitely see a distinct shift in her style. She loses the two-piece bodice set and she opts for a shirtwaist. Again, as I said, most women that wear a shirtwaist ensemble, they had color, frills, ruffles, and bows. Sarah's are almost always plainly pleated on the bodice or lapel, devoid of lace, patterns, or colors. She don't care. She don't care. It gets to the point that when you see her working amongst the men, she literally blends in, and you can see that she is amongst her peers, and her comfortability in dressing in herself comes out when she's around them. And because of that, she continues to grow confident in herself and her investigation skills. I also think that there is this part of Sarah that wants to conform to belong, which we see when the commissioner gifts Laszlo and John weapons. From then on, she really sticks to her shirtwaist and walking suit combo. Her skirts are always a simple tulip shape, smaller at the waist and goes down and flips up, you know, like the tulip flower. And you start to really get an idea of how Sarah feels about her role as a woman, femininity, and what it means to be a woman in the society as we see her progress. Although in episode 2, we do get this first glimpse of her in party wear, and even then she is so opposed to peacocking for John and Laszlo that she tells her maid she refuses to wear an evening gown because she has no reason to flatter herself. Sarah is a deeply lonely yet empathetic person, and it's apparent in her costuming. So I loved seeing her let loose at the opera. She's wearing this gorgeous green taffeta dress with black velvet trim and a slight bustle. It has a wider V that's kind of meant to show off your neckline, and she's also wearing a matching choker and jewels. She said, "I'm gonna flatter myself." She said, "Actually, I changed my mind. Uno reverse." But what I think is cool is you can tell because of her costuming it's important, and she was invited to the opera by Laszlo. And with everything Sarah does, you get the sense that, again, she did not dress up to impress them, but dressed up because she understood the importance of the conversation that was likely to take place and was honored to have a seat at the table. Therefore, she was not going to ruffle any feathers, and she was just going to go along with what she needed to go along with to get the tea. I can relate. As the show goes on, we see Sarah ditch mutton sleeves and go for smaller kick-up sleeves and more tailor-made walking suits, which were literally referred to as tailor-mades during the time because most people would have their clothes made to fit their body. And you can see again how much she tweaks her own clothing against the modern woman when she's at her Vassar reunion. Which of course she went to Vassar because Sarah is a semi-hypocritical hater of high society. Well, she benefits from it, and it's amazing, however, to watch her weaponize her privilege as she grows more confident. Her peers at Vassar are wearing more accurate representations for high society women at the time. Most wear jabots, a neckwear accessory consisting of decorative frills, lace, or ruffles, which is cool because a lot of them are actually removable and they would be attached to the wearer by their collar. And you notice Sarah is literally just wearing a men's tie, just simple black men's tie. One thing we learn about her costuming is Sarah becomes adept at when to weaponize femininity and privilege. While she rejects the ethos of the feminine aesthetic of the time, we see her discover throughout the show how to embrace her gender and how it can aid her in other ways. Again, she's still human. She does like beautiful things and she still partakes in certain trends. We see her in this beautiful cherry brocade dress, which I believe is inspired by the Japanism trend that was popular at the time. Everything a character wears can either aid or wound them, and I think Sarah quickly learned how aesthetics and clothing can expertly aid her when weaponized properly. Whenever Sarah is lurking or investigating anything, she is almost always wearing all black. No frills, no fuss. Even so far as to when she is reading the Santorelli letters, she's wearing a plain brown walking suit made of a simple wool. Even her hat is plain. There are no bows. There is literally nothing on it. It looks like a blank canvas because she's there to investigate the truth. Throughout season 1, her style is ever evolving. However, what I believe to be the real impact on her wardrobe is when her illusion of Laszlo and the type of man that he is shattered. When that happens, we see her essentially ditch all essence of a trendy young girl and move towards the new woman. Which is funny because in episode 5, she's literally just wearing a wide black silk tie and a waistcoat. She's not even trying at this point. She fully embraces her strength, and her way of dress almost becomes defiant. Like she's daring someone to question her style and the reason behind why she wears what she wears. In the finale, when she confronts Connor, she's once again wearing all black, showing she has become death herself, quite literally a blank slate. I love the compliment Teddy says to Sarah at the Institute after everything is said and done. You've always had the courage to do what needs to be done. And it's true. At the end of season 1, Sarah has definitely changed, some for the good and some for the bad, but she's willing to take the heat to be the one to go first. And for that, I just love me some Miss Sarah Howard.
I'm not hungry. I'm not hungry.
Moving on. Mary is an indigenous housemaid that works at the Chrysler Institute under the care of Dr. Laszlo Chrysler. Mary is gorgeous and plays a huge role in season 1 and its development, and I love seeing her style as sort of a foil to Sarah. Mary is fiercely loyal and quite observant, as she is actually nonverbal after facing severe trauma. When we first see her, she's wearing a shawl over her shoulders, a high neck ruffle collar with a striped polka dot overshirt. She's always wearing dark colors and earth tones. Something about Mary that's cool is because she's nonverbal, they do these little things to highlight her status and her awareness of the world. Throughout the show, Mary doesn't seem to acknowledge or care about fashion or her own beauty. What we know is that she is deeply in love with Laszlo and feels insecure next to Sarah, as Sarah can verbally communicate and bond with Laszlo in a way that Mary can't. The Institute is also a different aesthetic than the city. Set in the country, Mary often wears adorable brown tweed dresses and little ditzy floral prairie prints, which I'm thinking is a slight callback to her Western indigenous roots. However, Mary, she not one to be messed with. Her way of dressing is also a warning to the careless. Mary is dark and can be dangerous if need be, which we learn about her throughout this season. It's funny because I love how similar her and Sarah are, both of them having to do the same thing to their fathers, but one for revenge and one for mercy. And then you have them mimic each other. Sarah when she wants to disarm Laszlo, and Mary when she wants to charm him. In episode 3, we see this come to a head, and she's wearing this beautiful green dress, which is quite similar to something that Sarah wears earlier in the season. And I don't want to spoil what happens, but Laszlo Chrysler, you owe me a round. Oh, not a round, you owe me rounds after that scene. Ooh, I was so sad. The only other time we see a huge costuming change for Mary is one of my favorite scenes in the season, and it's when John takes her out to see Edison's Vitascope. It's a funny scene because people are actually shocked and horrified by this like early version of a movie, and you just see Mary in this lovely blue dress with white and gold brocade, a high collar, it has a matching shawl and sack bag. You can tell that this is Mary's best dress, and it's quite special to her and fancy compared to what she wears in her day-to-day. Mary's costuming is great because she is on a date with John, and they both pine for other people who are intentionally oblivious. Later on in episode 8, you see Mary wear the exact same dress when Laszlo invites her to have dinner with him. He asks her to have dinner, and she just turns around and goes upstairs, and you get the sense of, oh, maybe she's not going to forgive him, and she denies him. You see that she simply went to change, and she presents herself. And in that moment, when you realize it's the same dress, it's just so heartwarming. Even though she can't speak, Mary represents her moods through her dresses. Dark, deep blues and earthy colors when she feels shut out, and moody and black when she's angry, light blue when she's happy. At dinner with Laszlo, she wants to dazzle and impress him. And it's in that moment we see her realize she doesn't need words to do it, and that's the power of costuming. Overall, season 1 is an extremely accurate representation of evolving trends, wealth privilege, and what it means to be a woman in the 1890s. Alas, let us begin with what we know. Set in 1897, just 1 year after season 1, Angel of Darkness is the second half of the Alias anthology. Season 2 really expands upon the idea of how being different can be an advantage if used properly, and shows us that privilege can be an extremely wicked thing. It also tackles how hard it was to be a woman during this time period, things like postpartum depression, and what happiness and love really looked like. So much so that the season opens with Sarah and John joining Laszlo at the public execution of Martha Knapp, the first woman to be put to death in New York City. Another interesting thing about this season was Rudy Mance, the assistant costume director for season 1, became the principal designer for season 2. This is where we start to see some costuming choices that I don't necessarily love. It's just these like little touches of modernization that I feel like stick out a bit. And I'm glad that I'm not crazy, because in an interview with Hollywood Reporter, Mance actually spoke about his approach to costuming in season 2. You can see the progression of society simply by the increased amount of female characters in season 2. When we open on episode 1, we see that Sarah has not only started her own detective agency, but it is all female detectives as well. Going through her day-to-day life feels a bit redundant, but the kidnapping of the child of a Spanish consulate at a time when US and Spanish relations were at a boiling point, thrust Sarah into her first real case. Season 2 Sarah is so funny, bro. Right out the gate, she's driving herself wildly down the middle of Broadway, and you see that she now has a bigger bag to carry that Miss Scree Mouse too. She has a bigger purse, but I get. Besides her wild driving, the show opens with her wearing a gorgeous black leather duster, which we see throughout the season. This black duster that looks like leather, it's actually wax canvas. Beautiful. This technique was really popular at the time. They replicated the technique on the show in order to limit the amount of unethical sources they used. Fur was also very popular at this time. There's not too much in the show. However, all the fur was sourced from thrift stores in Budapest where the show filmed. As again, the costume designers and directors thought, if we're gonna get fur, might as well get vintage, chop and screw it, and make our own things. You know what happened to Mary in season 1. And one thing I love about season 2, whether it was an intentional thing or not, whenever Sarah is seeing Laszlo at the Institute, she is either wearing all black in mourning or she's wearing something that is an homage to Mary. She has this beautiful brown earth tone outfit with diagonal stripes and ruffles down the bodice that remind me so much of Mary. However, episode 3, we start to get glimpses of like the modernization that the designers did for the season. We see Sarah in this blouse that literally looks like it could be from Reformation or J. Crew. And I don't know if it was the sheen or the cut of it that stood out, especially considering Sarah doesn't opt for the typical hairstyle of the time and instead wears a low chignon bun with like strands out, literally like Bella Hadid bun. I honestly don't mind that the fashion took so much of a backseat because you get the sense that this season the stakes are higher. Because of the discrimination against Spanish immigrants at the time, Sarah knows that she is solely responsible for finding the Lenoris child alive and safe. The biggest change, I would say, is the addition of the wide leg culottes. Culottes were controversial even when worn for sporting activities, so the fact that Sarah's just wearing them out in public, like that's a bad bitch, like that's a bad bitch. While the culottes were cool, I really felt a distinct shift away from any feminine aesthetics in the second season. During John's engagement party where Violet is dressed as Marie Antoinette, which can we just talk about how apropos that is? I will get to her in a minute. Sarah opts for an extremely boring and extremely muted simple blue gown. Get the sense that her and Laszlo refuse to participate in the folly and the waste of it all. However, Sarah is quite hypocritical, only having the choice to turn away from the society because she belongs to it. Because we all know there's a difference between declining an invitation and being stopped at the door. Literally tries to get on John and like micromanage him at his own engagement party, and don't worry, he got on her. Drags her for filth and calls her childless, lonely, and corseted. That would have been my 14th, 15th, 16th reason why. The story is just so tragically heartbreaking, and I really wanted them to be endgame as much as I love Violet. Later on in the season, as the cases continue to develop and Sarah starts to work closer with Burns and his friends, you see her essentially ditch all sense of trends and dress very plain and very masculine. In this season, she wears a lot of pinstripe and check, which was allegedly inspired by the Chanel 90s tweed jackets. No idea why. Season is plaid after plaid after plaid for Miss Howard Mamas. Like, she does not stop. And it's sad because at the very end of the season, Sarah is seated at dinner with John and Laszlo, and she's not wearing a dinner dress, which would be very taboo at the time. Instead, she's in a spruced up walking suit with kick-up sleeves, and it's either culottes or a skirt, I can't really tell. She's wearing a hat as well. She's wearing a hat indoors, and she just stands out like 2015 Harry Styles in One Direction, and I don't love it for her. She is completely comfortable with herself and who she's becoming. And not only that, but because of her success, society knows what to expect from her. And for the most part, they accept it as they finally see her value. It's sad because Sarah ultimately becomes the instrument she detests. Knowing what happened to Martha Knapp will now happen to Libby. But she learns that just like our wardrobe, life is made of choices. And each one tells a story along the way. Let's get into Libby. Libby is a character in season 2. She is a nurse at the Lying In Hospital. As a character fascinates me. Not only is the actress Gorgina, but so talented. She really slayed because Libby's story is a very complex and dark tale, and she swings from emotion to emotion like a wrecking ball. When we first meet Libby, she's wearing a semi-traditional nurse's outfit for the time. Outfitted in a blue floor-length dress covered in a white apron with a white nurse's cap. What's interesting about this time is these dresses that nurses wore were actually really thick wool dresses that were an attempt to protect the wearer from catching fevers when tending to sick patients. If you've seen pictures of old-timey nurses, you know that nurses at this time wore hats. And it's crazy because the hats were actually inspired by a nun's habit, as most nurses back then were actually nuns with little to no training. Although Florence Nightingale actually established the first nursing school in 1860, manifesting at least some of them had training. Again, there's a really modern costuming decision that I don't like. She wears this kind of hideous Western belt that I personally think should have been replaced with a chatelaine, which is a belt of tools most nurses wore around their waist at the time. Think of it kind of like a Swiss Army knife, which, can you just think about that? Just carrying around your little tools, just swinging, dangling, like, yum, how sanitary. Speaking of aiding or wounding in a character, I love the way that Libby's work aids her in what she's trying to achieve. Because at the time, a lot of nurses would wear their uniforms in public as a way to be identified if need be. So when you see her, you're immediately disarmed. And you can tell when Sarah meets her for lunch, she hasn't a clue what's sitting right in front of her. However, like Sarah, Libby's clothes leave tiny clues about her. Libby shows up for lunch with Sarah dressed in an outfit extremely similar to hers, although she has smaller kick-up sleeves. What I love about the outfit that Libby wears to lunch is the buttons on her coat form a cross. It's just genius. It's just genius. Also wears her regular clothing much like she wears her uniform, very rigid, almost soldier-like, and the sense that everything she wears, even her day-to-day clothes, are a costume for her. When we see her in episode 6 in a chemise and a corset, much like Sarah, you get the sense that this is the real Libby. This is how they feel the most free, when they're stripped bare of all the societal standards from their head to their toes. Also, she is with Gugu, and it's the physical embodiment of her mental unraveling, and it's just genius. Which, by the way, Gugu Knox is 100% a real person who was a founding member of the Dusters, and Dr. Mark is a real person, and the Lying In Hospital was also real. So allegedly, in my research, I found out that JP Morgan gave the hospital $1 million donations. In the show, we know that Sarah alleges about rich men taking their mistresses to get schmushmortions there. It could allegedly be very accurate because in my research, I also found an article about a woman who tragically expired after her 8th procedure at this hospital. Carr really put his foot on New York City's neck, and he said, I'm not letting up. When Libby goes out to execute her plan against the Vanderbilts, Gugu says she looks like a high society lady. And in that moment, you realize Libby is dressed exactly like Sarah. Wearing an all-black walking suit with a tall boater hat and brooch, which is more than likely a mourning brooch, which is a huge trend at the time. You would keep a lock of a dead one's hair or a memento mori portrait that you would have had taken post-mortem. Victorians love to prop up their dead people and pose with them. I don't know why. I don't know why. Even has a cheap silver watch pinned on her shirt in the way that Sarah wears her father's. Libby's costuming shows us how highly intelligent she is because she studied Sarah and adopted her look, realizing again how it would aid her and allow her to blend in. Many of these little costuming decisions, and I love them because as she turns the corner to leave towards the park, her collar pops up and you see just the tiniest amount of blood, showing the danger that lurks right below the surface of Libby's appearance. When Libby did what she had to do to that detective in the alley, you notice that she's dressed exactly like Mary. Dark, all black dress with wild, slightly curly hair, both wielding the same type of weapon. They are the epitome of female rage, and this season, female rage won. I'm happy about. Justice for Mary. Okay. Our gorgeous little Gibson girl. Let's talk about Miss Violet Hayward. Violet Hayward is the fictional character and illegitimate child of William Randolph Hearst, owner of the New York Journal. I think it's supposed to be a knockoff of the New York Post. Not sure though. Violet is such a sweet character, and I love how she exists as a foil for Sarah in the same way Mary did, but just under different circumstances. We first meet Violet. She's at dinner with John in a beautiful purple evening dress with a wide V-shaped neckline, a choker, and matching earrings. Of course, her name literally means purple, so we see her in purple a lot. But what I love is that purple also signifies royalty. Because of how she came into this world, she isn't allowed to be recognized for her status. And wearing purple, I get a sense that she's sending a little message or a signal to everyone else, like, don't forget, I'm New York City royalty as well. Later in episode 5, we see her in another beautiful purple brocade dinner dress, and they're eating at Delmonico's. And I'm somebody who does not like purple. Like, purple is one of my least favorite colors. So the fact that she sold me on it, the actress who plays Violet, is absolutely stunning. Typically dressing in the trendy Gibson Girl silhouette and aesthetic, Violet looks a little bit outdated and tacky sometimes. And I think it is because she's a little behind the curve on the latest trends, being that she isn't in society's inner circle. But it also serves as a signifier to those around her that money doesn't necessarily buy class or style. The engagement ball, Violet is dressed as Marie Antoinette, and I just want to hug her this entire time. It's so fitting she'd picked that costume for the ball, considering at one point in the show, she tells John that she feels as if the whole of New York whispers as she walks in the room, because that's something the Austrian-born Marie Antoinette faced heavily during her time as Dauphine of France. Violet and Marie are also women who don't strike me as necessarily happy women, but more so scared young girls who are fulfilling duties that they are told to. I love that Violet continues to dress as herself and that she ultimately ends up pregnant in the end with John Moore. I think they are exactly what each other needs, even though they may not be exactly what each other wants. Violet teaches us a lot about sacrifice and the things that we will do to maintain a level of status and privilege. She deserves a lot of credit for her bravery and her unwillingness to apologize for being an illegitimate child or being who she is. I really wish there was more with her character. I loved Violet Hayward.
Overall, the costuming in the Alias anthology is beautiful and highlights so many aspects of femininity and the paths that life can take one on. Not only do I praise it for its dedication to historical accuracy, but also its exploration of how each woman's world impacts not only their style, but also the limitations or lack thereof they have to explore it. At the end of the show, Sarah shares a quote with her girls at the detective agency. And I loved it so much, I figured I'd end the video with it. You will not see a lot of photographs of detectives that look like us in the Police Gazette. Not yet, anyways. But I think of it like this. Our office at 808 Broadway is lit by electricity. And before electricity, people used kerosene lamps. And before that, they used candles made from whale oil. And the man with the whale oil candle could have never envisioned all of this. I hope you guys enjoyed. Thank you for watching. Bye-bye.